internet.
Good morning. It is Sunday, but not just any Sunday. It's the Sunday before the 250th anniversary of three major documents that came into play a long time ago. Although I'll grant you, cannabis kind of outdates it by a couple of millennia. But the three important documents, of course, Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and of course, the Bill of Rights. And we're going to go into three of those articles, the 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution, and a couple of the amendments too, because some important shit is going on, and we're going to get into it in the rotation. That's when you turn the other thing on.
I know, right? I was trying to get it to play, but wasn't playing. It's okay. We're semi-professional here.
That's right.
So, there it is. I always say politics got us into this mess, and politics is eventually going to get us out. And that means we got to deal with the government, and that means we got to deal with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and of course the judicial branch. And we are hoping it works towards us. Usually it doesn't. Actually, this week, the Supreme Court proved once again that even a broken clock can be right at least twice a day, and in this case, once, as far as I know. But we have some of the best people to talk about that here today. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Gary Stein. I'm the political director and policy director for Suncoast NORML and the master of public health. Insert applause here. Thank you very much. And to my right, coming to us from somewhere on the Appalachian Trail. Oh, it's the Smoky Mountains now. Okay. It keeps on moving. Target. Our executive director, Christopher Cano. Chris, how are things going out there in the mountains? Oh, Gary, I am enjoying it very much. Traveling down to Florida, I took the long way, and cutting through Tennessee and stopping in Cherokee, North Carolina, to visit the only essentially fully functional dispensary in the South until you get to Florida, which is of course run by the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. And I got to say, Primo Products, amazing drive-through. Humongous facility, and really the best part about it is, of course, no taxes, which is always a fun thing, especially since we're getting close to celebrating America's 250th. And what is more American than not wanting to pay taxes on your products like tea or even cannabis?
and no regulations from a state regulator, which is kind of interesting.
Well, I got to say, their products look like every other state regulated dispensary. They got great labeling, they tell you what's in it. So I can't complain. I mean, I think they're doing some great things there in Cherokee, North Carolina, over there in the Cherokee lands. And, hey, more power to them. I think it's fantastic to see more native cannabis. If folks want to learn more about folks in the native cannabis industry, go back and check out our February episode where we interviewed a gentleman from the First Nations in Canada, in Quebec, and who was one of the first dispensary owners there. As we see more and more legalization, we're going to see more and more Native American, tribes and organizations getting into cannabis, and I think it's fantastic. It's weird because North Carolina is a prohibition state. It's not like they have adult use. It's not like you can just get it easily, and not every state. We celebrate having 41 medical marijuana states in this country, but not every state is really out there having a full, robust system. And even in a state like Florida, where we have, dispensaries everywhere and you can get a medical card, quality of products is always a concern. Right now, we're looking at environmental impacts, which I know has been a campaign issue come up in the Commissioner of Agriculture race. And I think it's befitting that we have the former Florida Commissioner of Agriculture on the show here with us today, who was part of the dynamite legal team that helped NORML deliver a win for cannabis consumers in the United States versus Amani, which is the Supreme Court case that was ruled recently that said, essentially, you can keep your guns as a cannabis consumer. But I'll let the lawyers talk more about that, because we have Nikki on, who was a co-author of the amicus brief that made this all happen. So, Nikki, welcome. Appreciate having you back in the rotation.
Of course, you always know that I love being back here talking about my favorite subject. There's lots of things that go on in the world, but knowing that I can always come home here keeps my cup very full as we go through some tumultuous times in American history.
Indeed. Well, Nikki, it's been awesome. I remember being on the campaign trail in 2018 together and just seeing you really just rock and shock and take the world by storm, becoming the first woman to lead the Department of Agriculture. And I know that has been a good old boys club run by folks friendly to the cattle ranch industry and so many other big ag companies. And you came in there and you did something amazing. You took what became legal under the 2018 Farm Bill, and you did what you could to create an entirely regulated industry of small businesses by helping expand the hemp industry into Florida and giving an opportunity to many small business owners that are still fighting to this day for their lifeline because of how cannabis and politics is shaking out. And you've really been in the trenches of the fight for civil rights when it comes to cannabis, for small business owners' rights when it comes to getting in this industry. And so, you were right there in the thick of it, helping co-author this amicus brief in the United States versus Hemani. And I think a lot of folks are probably not as legally astute. At most people in America probably watch Law and Order, SVU most days, and that's the extent of it, or even Suits. So tell us a little bit for the lay out there and all of us regular folks, what was United States v. Hemani all about? Why should folks even care about this case, and why is it so important that we won?
Yeah, it's thanks, Chris, for all of that the introduction of that. When I did run in 2018, for anybody who watched my campaign for Commissioner of Agriculture, I came in with it. with a different perspective of how to run campaigns. We were very focused on what I called 3 W's: weed, water, weapons, and really the juxtaposition in how government regulates all of those. That you have the overregulation of cannabis, but yet the underregulation of firearms and protections for our environment. We have blue-green algae coming out of Lake Okeechobee and the red tide on both East and West Coast. And so we came in and understanding that we had a moment in Florida history that we could start to really shape the future of our state. And I always said the future is always going to be green, whether, in the cannabis space. And so one of the things that I really also campaigned on, not only just the legalization and expansion of hemp in our state, which was so important, because as we know, Florida has lockdown licenses, has overhead regulations that make our products very expensive. No offense to Gary, who's a doctor, but you having to go to see your doctor every 270 days, making sure that it's a very regulated, very expensive. At the end of the day, a lot of our small mom and pop shops couldn't have an opportunity to get into the cannabis space, that consumers who just wanted to be consumers and utilize the product and not have to go to a doctor, not have to get a recommendation, and not have to go to a dispensary, gave people an opportunity to try different products and to start to really expand consumer awareness of the overall cannabis plant. And so one of the things that was really disturbing to me as a cannabis patient was the fact that I couldn't go buy a firearm. That there was this huge, ATF. It was one of the biggest issues that I dealt with really as my commissioner at the time. People kept asking me about buying guns and the concealed weapons permits, which is something that came underneath the Department of Agriculture. And I infamously came onto social media and showed both my concealed weapons permit card and my medical marijuana card. But I always made a caveat that you can't purchase a new firearm because that is federally regulated by the ATF. And on the ATF form, an asterisk had been added to the form, some years ago, that made sure that there was a caveat that even if you are in a legal state of both medical and or recreational, that it is still considered a narcotic, a scheduled narcotic, and that you cannot purchase a firearm. And I was like, that's bullshit. That's absolutely bullshit. And so we started that conversation back in 2019 when I first came in here of how we can file a federal lawsuit. And it took us some time because, of course, we had the pandemic and had to shift our priorities during the pandemic to get agriculture in the state of Florida through the pandemic. But as soon as that was done, we came out and we filed our federal lawsuit. And why that is important, because one, it's about civil liberties. It's about that you shouldn't have to choose between your constitutional right, the Second Amendment of purchasing and owning a firearm in a legal manner, but also it's a constitutional right here in the state of Florida to be a medical patient of cannabis. And so we just saw that the two conflicted. And so we saw a problem. We filed a lawsuit. It was first Fried versus Garland. I had all of my Democratic world, up in flares that here comes the only statewide elected Democrat filing a lawsuit against the Biden administration. But it was always the right thing to do. And so it gave us an opportunity to participate and be on the front lines with Joe and the rest of NORML as we saw the Supreme Court pick up Himani, which was a different fact pattern than what we came into. We came in as just a pure legal question of a cannabis patient being able to purchase a firearm. We had three classes of people, me and my official capacity as commissioner. Then we had veterans who obviously are proficient in firearms that were unable to or did not want to lose their access to firearms by being on the medical marijuana registry. And then, of course, a class of people who are single, women who are small business owners who wanted first personal protection and couldn't purchase it because they are on the cannabis registry. So this was an opportunity, and why people need to focus on this and pay attention, because the Supreme Court did get this right. They said there's no way that you are going to be able to just disarm an entire class of people purely because of possession, not because of any of their own personal actions of being under the influence or being dangerous, but the mere classification that you're a cannabis user or possession of cannabis in the same space. And so while it was narrowly tailored to that specific fact pattern, but it certainly set the framework for the rest of the country that are dealing with a lot of these cases, including ours still in Florida. The 11th Circuit had a very strong opinion towards the Department of Justice and remanded the case back to the lower court. We do believe that we're going to have a resolution to our case as well.
Well, Nikki, that was a very succinct and in-depth analysis that you just dropped on all of us. So thank you for all the hard work and helping, deliver a victory in this case. I mean, obviously, from doing something that took political courage to challenge your own political party, to challenge the leader of the political party who's president of the United States and say, look, you're getting it wrong on this. And everyday people are being affected. I mean, that takes real, as we like to say in the Tampa area, cojones. And you did a fantastic job of just making sound legal arguments all the way through. And of course, we were able to help deliver victory in this case. Now, you mentioned a little bit about women and being able to carry. And I just want to touch on this subject because, it's like for every win that we get as NORML over the past, 60 plus years, it's always something else to move on to. And we talked about a little bit on a recent show, but, in the state of Alabama now, they have access to medical marijuana, and they're making women submit to monthly pregnancy tests to maintain their medical marijuana cards. I mean, are we really there in this society where we're regulating people's bodies to that point where just to have access to medicine that helps you from chronic debilitating conditions, you got to piss in a cup every month? That's ludicrous. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. And unfortunately, what's happening in our society is that we are going backwards. Look at the fight for reproductive health care. Florida now has a 6-week abortion ban, even though that it was on the ballot this past election cycle that got 57% that in any other state besides Florida would have now been the law of the land. And so we are going backwards on women's rights. I was actually watching a clip earlier today of the Turning Point convention that Erica Kirk was heading up, where you saw conservative women say, I don't care. I don't need my right to vote. My husband can vote for me. And so there is this crazy movement across our country that women's rights are less than, that all of the suffrage movement is for nothing. And so, yes, we're putting up these things. And there's even a movement that for women who go through the medical procedure of having an abortion now can be charged with murder. This is where this country is heading if people don't start to wake up and realize that our civil liberties are on the line, that voting has a direct impact on where we go from here. There was something like 80 million Americans that stayed home and did not vote in the 2024 election. So what is happening to our nation, what is happening to our rights is on the American people, because a lot of people stayed home. And so if you're not happy with the direction of this conservative movement across the South, across the country, country, then this is the moment that people need to stand up and need to talk about how we form coalitions, even if you don't agree on every aspect of the coalition, but how to form coalitions and put our state and our nation in a better forward movement that isn't penalizing women for getting access to medicine. We're not certainly asking them every day to piss in a cup if they're alcoholics or if they're addicted to any other narcotic. This is what's happening. And of course, and then you get to a point of like taking personal responsibility. If you are pregnant, no, you shouldn't be drinking. No, you shouldn't be on narcotics. No, you shouldn't. You have to think through your access to cannabis and your usage of it. But again, at some point, personal liberties and personal responsibility have to be in the same conversation.
Yeah. And, you brought up about the reproductive rights amendment in Florida, how it failed to garner 60% of the vote because Florida has this, threshold that constitutional amendments need 60% of voters to support it. Another one that failed that same year in 2024 was the adult use initiative. And I know it was controversial in certain circles, and the powers that be that didn't want it at all were able to plug holes in the cannabis coalition, if you will, in the state of Florida by pitting the hemp industry versus the medical marijuana treatment centers that have grown into big, huge multi-state operations. And they dumped 98% of the money to get that initiative over the top. And a lot of folks looked at it as a true leave amendment rather than an actual amendment that was going to help with civil rights. We supported it because when we looked at the cost benefit analysis of allowing a few players in the market to have preferential treatment versus ending the arrest for 20 grams or more, which saddle people with felony charges in the state of Florida, which having any amount of unregulated concentrate is a felony in Florida. I mean, these are major concerns that we had, and it was the civil rights aspect that led us to support it. But now we're seeing, there are a lot of things happening that I know under your watch as Ag Commissioner wouldn't be going down, but under the current Ag Commissioner, we've seen, Truly getting away with some environmental degradation issues and contributing very heavily to certain political figures in the country, even to Donald Trump. And just curious, what role do you believe these multi-state operators are having in shaping what legalization looks like? Because for us, we believe in a safe, affordable access for cannabis consumers. NORML is a consumer protection, consumer civil rights organization. And what we're seeing is that it seems like the market and the industry is being shaped to the capitalists, to the business, to these big multi-state operators that can buy influence. And in the grand scheme of things, it feels like patients are being left behind. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, Chris. I said we're in a really interesting moment, right? That we needed the multi-state operators, we needed the big cash flows into the industry in order for the ballot initiatives to go through. And so many of our, out west and out north, that the ballot initiatives needed the capital infusion in order to get across the finish line. But what's happening is that now that cash infusion is getting to political, just like you're seeing across the rest of the country, and all the billionaires and all the multimillionaires are buying influence and don't care about who they harm or the consumers, because it is about making money at the end of the day for them. It is not about quality of products or lowering the cost for consumers or listening to the consumers about issues that they're finding with products. They want it to be environmentally savvy. This is something that has always been a hot topic in the industry is the environmental impact of growing cannabis out inside grows, and the lights and the water usage and electric usage. It has always been a hot topic in the conversation. But what's happening is the MSOs are buying so much influence that all of those environmental protections, which should be in place, are being closed out because they're buying that influence. And unfortunately, as we're getting into legalization and starting to get to adult use, they're having a tremendous shaping of what that looks like, making sure again that they're cutting out the small stores and which creates the competition, and we are creating monopolies. And so it is very dangerous to the consumers, and that's why people need to continue to invest in NORML, invest in your consumer protection agencies across our country, because we're getting to a point where the consumer is being left out for the billionaires and the millionaire class, and the people that have the influence in the Oval Office and the halls of the Capitol, and the halls of legislation. And so this is really where we need everybody to wake back up, that we all feel very like, okay, we're getting there. We got, as Chris said, 49 states that have a medical programs. We're seeing legalization coming across, and we have, Schedule 1 conversation to Schedule 3, and people feel emboldened that we're finally making a lot of progress. But what does that progress look like, and what barriers are we putting in place for future generations to participate in this program? And of course, there has to still be the conversation about equity, and the still conversation about who are the ones who have been harmed the most by these regulations and these laws on the books. Here in Florida, we're still seeing in the jail systems, an overpopulation of Black and brown men that are still being arrested on cannabis charges. And the state of Florida is not even releasing this data. So we have to understand that the MSOs, which are not minority controlled by any stretch of the imagination, are having an enormous seat at the table to direct these policies. So it is really important for the consumers and people who have been involved in this movement for decades to not be asleep and think that they've accomplished the goals. And we are seeing consistently, state after state, including Florida, as you pointed out, Chris, that continues to put new regulations in place to kind of pull back the industry. So the game is not over, the war is not won, and people need to stay very engaged in this moment.
I've been in this business pushing now for 15 years since I knew you, since we first met, essentially, when I was still working on Medicaid expansion. But when I first got into it, all I wanted to do was just get access for the patients to this medicine. I did not see this tsunami of corporate greed building up behind us. And then I saw the manipulation that was occurring way back when they were first starting out the First Amendment, and how they were giving out the first licenses, and how certain companies were trying to do preemptive measures to try to take a larger share of the market. And then I saw corporations like Trulieve swallow up Harvest. And then I realized there's an amoeba-like effect going on right now, which could be metastasizing within the industry, where the corporations are going to overwhelm, and therefore the patient will be way far down the line on priority. Is that basically what has happened?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I pop in here for a second? I got to say, this is like industry and patient and everything else. Like, this all forgets about the root of it, which is the cannabis consumer. And there is no recreational Schedule 3 use, right? It's all scientific use or medical use. It's all dispensed by a pharmacist or subject to a prescription. So in the beginning, when we were talking about Brownie Mary, right, or Dennis Perone, and we took the idea of giving cannabis in edible form to people who are at the end of life, right? This is like, you have to be a really awful, cruel person to not accept the fact that people who are on their deathbed feel better from weed and let them use it, right? And then they die.
Use. Yeah.
But that compassionate use was really, one could call it the camel's nose under the tent for legalization, right? And then we shifted the frame from there to these other qualifying conditions. And then before you knew it, people in Oregon and Washington and Colorado and California, all these like extraordinary active skiing, surfing communities, everyone got sick. They all fell ill. It was crazy. They all fell ill and needed weed to get better. Right? And this was the beginning of our buying into this notion that, well, if people accept this as a medical substance, perhaps we'll be able to make more traction with it that way than arguing that it's like a benign, mildly psychoactive substance, like mildly psychoactive like my shirt, that people should be able to use outside the schedules. And we needed to figure out a way, because people forget that one of the things that we had to do under the single convention of 1961 that we ratified, it was in full force and effect in 1967, was to create the Controlled Substances Act. That's what we had to do, kind of thing, right? But to me right now, as not only a person who loves cannabis, the plant per se, and knows a lot of people who are small business operators and legacy people, and certainly tens of thousands of consumers, I fear that adult use consumption as we know it is about to end, and that we've been asleep for a long, long time, while these MSOs, right, and every one of these companies that starts out and they're big enough and they have in some jurisdictions adult use dispensaries, right, and verticals, and then in others it's medical, they're the ones that have the ability and the power to control the industry under Schedule 3 and to literally boot out, like remove all of these people, all these entities who are unable to meet the licensing and schedule regime that's going to be required to comply with DEA regulations. So that's
I definitely want to get back into this topic because it is huge. But I'd like, by the way, for those of you who don't know, because we didn't have a chance to introduce him yet, this is Joe Bondi, chairman of the board, our Frank Sinatra of NORML, essentially. And also, as you mentioned, co-counsel on the Hemani case. Could you give us, since this is like one of the first topics we're going to deal with today, the case history beyond Hemani and how it ended up over the Supreme Court, and how a case history of a one man can change the industry?
Yeah, I mean, Hemani is interesting, and I don't know if it changed the industry because, again, it's not about the industry. It's about cannabis consumption and the possession of a firearm. And it's a narrow holding. It does not stand for the premise that you can continue to smoke weed and use a gun and be actively intoxicated and do something dangerous. It's a narrow holding that under the facts of this case, the statute was unconstitutional as applied to Daniel Ali Hemani. And Hemani was a Pakistani national coming back into the U.S. He was found to have ties to an Iranian terroristic group. A warrant was executed against his home. He was cooperative. A bag of weed was found in some proximity to a Glock pistol. There was no evidence of his intoxication. There was no evidence of his actual using while near the gun at all. And the lower court, essentially the circuit on appeal from the Fifth Circuit, they had found that there was insufficient evidence to charge him under the statute, which is known as 922G of Title 18 of the U.S. Code, making it a felony for you to be an illegal user of drugs and to possess a firearm. And, NORML argued in the Supreme Court, and we'd argued in Nikki's case, and we argued in the Fifth Circuit, a case named Daniels. We've been arguing about the Second Amendment not applying, not being able to be utilized as a status-based ban, I would call it. Marijuana use couldn't be a status-based ban to the possession of a firearm. And so we argued that in Hemani, that, the last time there'd been any kind of a status-based ban was during the French Indian War, where Catholics were deemed too dangerous to possess guns, right? Because the Anglican Church they were at odds with. But this would have been the status-based ban that just because of, and that's what the statute says, you were an illegal user of drugs, you could not possess a firearm under any circumstances. And as the judges pointed out in oral argument and in their decision, and it's like, what if you have a gummy to help you with sleep, or Justice Barrett was not pot, but other drugs. What about an Ambien? Like if you need to sleep and it's your spouse's and you don't have a prescription, but you've got a gun, or the kid who needs to study and takes an Adderall, right? And he happens to have it's interesting, the college kid with the weapon taking the Adderall. I'm from New York City. It's different. I might have a different view on that, but that was her example. And all the justices kind of had these examples. Sonia Sotomayor was asking in a very kind of Bronx way, what about a person with a stick of marijuana that they have at a party and their gun's nowhere near them, right? So ultimately the justices understood, and the Justice Department, to their discredit, found that all of these examples were a violation of 922G3, and along the way called us a bunch of mean names, right? They likened us to these habitual drunkards that had been barred from having firearms. But the justices in oral argument came back and they said, you don't have to be like a habitual drunkard. You could be a habitual drunk, right? And in fact, a lot of the founding fathers were kind of habitual drunks, but they weren't disarmed. So it was quite a win. I think it might have been, I don't know, there's probably been another 9-0 unanimous decision this term, right? But it was a pretty good 9-0 unanimous decision. And the thing I drew from it, that it was, because I got a couple quotes I thought were cool, is Justices Alito and Kagan agreed on something. And wow. their agreement was, quote, marijuana use today is like alcohol use at the founding, right?
Wow.
So I don't know. I think about what that means for rescheduling and everything coming up on our horizon, and how interesting that fact is. But times have changed. It can still be applied, 922G3, to people who are actively intoxicated, really dangerous. The court invited Congress to find some drugs that, are per se dangerous. You shouldn't possess a firearm, maybe like while tripping on DMT or something. I don't know. And I think meth probably is a perpetual state of danger, but it was a good one for most marijuana users, right? And theoretically, you can possess your firearm. I imagine the ATF is going to offer us new guidance on the form and how to fill that out. But I mean, this notion of scheduling and rescheduling to 3 is an extraordinary problem, as I said before, for most of the people I know who are not ill, we're just cannabis consumers. And it'll be interesting to see the interplay between that kind of use and what happens next.
Well, Nikki, I wanted to circle back to you on this, so go ahead on your comment. I got a question for you.
I was just going to say, for anybody who has not listened to the oral arguments, please do so. They were some of, as an attorney, maybe it's just being a legal dork and a cannabis dork, but listening to the oral arguments from the Supreme Court and listening to these justices ask questions about gummies and ayahuasca, and just, it was so just entertaining. And then Gorsuch did a whole line of, how much our founding fathers drank and would they be disarmed. It was just so awesome to just listen and to know that we struck a chord, and where this is one of those issues that crosses over partisan lines. And again, there's very few issues in American politics right now that people can truly come together on, and this is one of those issues. And so again, for anybody who did not listen or did not to the oral arguments, if you got 2 hours on a road trip or in the shower, not that you're going to be in the shower for 2 hours, but just take a listen. It was certainly entertaining for all of us.
But I did drop in the comments so folks can read the Supreme Court's opinions. They can hear what the justice had to say. Nikki, you're in politics, obviously. You're chair of the Florida Democratic Party right now, so you have a pulse to a lot of the partisanness that goes on in our nation. How often does the U.S. Supreme Court all agree that the Trump administration is wrong?
Not often these days. Well, let me take this back. A lot of our justices and judges across our country are saying no to the Trump administration on a lot of things. But for this Supreme Court to have a 9-0 decision that tells the Department of Justice under the Trump administration that you are categorizing this wrong, that this is not the way that we are going to apply this law, is certainly a new day, and I would love to hope that this is a new chapter for the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, we saw a whole lot of opinions this week that went back to the 7-2, the 7-2, 6-3 decisions. That just really truly shows on some of those other policy issues that we as a country and we as a Supreme Court are very far apart.
But you could bring your Desert Eagle with a laser sight to the supermarket in Hawaii. Right.
That was what I was going to say, because that was the other decision that was laid out this last week in regards to the Second Amendment. And it's interesting that the Supreme Court decided to almost bundle those two opinions being released at the same time. Whereas, as you were saying, that the private owner of a business could allow open carry, even if it's just an Aldi's.
Gary, that brings up a great point, though, because this is where the intersection of politics is interesting. Because I recall of no public use state where you can use it publicly that is also an open carry state. But I'll let the lawyers kind of run the numbers and figure that out for us. But it'd be interesting to find out what state you can actually walk down the street with your Desert Eagle on your hip, Joe, and actually have a blunt in your mouth at the same time. That'd be Nikki's doing the math, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I don't.
Is there one? Is there one?
Intersection yet.
Florida eventually may be the first, right?
Florida could be.
It sounds like a Florida thing to do. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Most Florida thing to do. Yes, while you're walking,
going down Duval Street with your AR across you, and drinking your cannabis drinks down Duval Street, right?
Yes, indeed. Nikki, I know you got a flight to go and you're going to leave us earlier on the show, but one last thing, because I think it's important, and we've touched on it a little bit, but as we move forward, the Schedule 3 status, I know Joe can fill in on this a little bit later. The way they're structuring it is that the DEA wants the medical marijuana treatment centers, the MSOs and such, to sell them the cannabis. And then the DEA basically sells it back to the dispensaries to give to us consumers. And it's just so much bureaucracy. We see how the DEA has poisoned, every single administrative hearing that we've had in the last 2 administrations to actually give this a fair shake. It seems like they want to corner the medical market for big pharma and for these MSOs. And it just seems like there is just too much coziness between the industry and the major power players with a lot of money and the current administration and politics, because money in politics remains at the crux of every major issue in American society. So I just wanted to see, where do you think this is all headed? Like, do you think that we're going to end up having to buy DEA approved cannabis from these MSOs that don't always sell us the best quality products that we have truth and labeling issues with? And then will it be covered by insurance in the grand scheme of things? Because, the Trump administration has basically said, medical marijuana under a state legal system is Schedule 3. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on where we're headed. What do you see on the horizon?
I'm very nervous about what may or may not come out of the DEA and rules and regulations moving forward. I think that these MSOs have gotten very smart, very savvy, very trickery of how they regulate the marketplace. And I do think that there is a very cozy relationship between some of the larger MSOs who can financially pay for some top-notch attorneys, lobbyists, get access to the Oval Office, get access to the Trump universe. And I do think that, as we've seen in so many of our states, that they're going to carve out a path just for them. So I do think that there is going to be a limit amount of DEA licenses. So if you are in any of our states right now, I'm going to encourage you all to apply for DEA licenses. I don't care what you're selling, apply for them. You saw quickly how much True Leave has moved. For those who have not been paying attention, True Leave is off rec. They have moved so they get into the New York Stock Exchange that they are medical only. And so that makes me nervous that we are going to have individuals who are no longer going to be pushing for us to eventually get to a full adult use country, and that they're going to limit the amount of DEA licenses that can get sold to pharmacies across the entire United States, whether or not there is a medical or non-medical program in your state. And yes, I think that one of the benefits will be that insurance and Medicaid and Medicare. It's been something that I, of course, have always been pushing, that some of those costs are going to get covered by insurance and start getting covered by some of these healthcare providers. However, we all should not be stuck there. And I think that's where our concern is that we move to the Schedule 3 and have a very strict regulated industry that only a couple players get to play in. What does that do to our state programs? What does that do to the movement of trying to get to rec into adult use? And do now these big MSOs become big pharma? And realistically start to capitalize on some of these products. And when I have said that to some of our MSOs, they freaked out to the point that makes me wonder that we have all uncovered the framework that is ahead of us. So I'm worried.
I mentioned last week that I noticed that Nikki, that Kim Rivers, the CEO of True Leave, has set up an automatic sale of 2.5 million of her shares. And people were contacting me and asking me, why is that? Is she being penalized for losing the last two elections? Because they put out almost $30 million for that. And she was somehow paying it back to cover their tax issues and things of that sort. But you have a different take on that.
I do. I do think that, look, and this is a take, and that's coming from watching what happens in this Trump administration. Nothing is done for free, right? Every time that Trump is moving on any issue, I don't care what it is, there's always a financial benefit to him and his family. So what is that financial benefit in the cannabis space? Is there stocks being traded so that the Trump family can come in and buy True Leaf stock or be given True Leaf stock? I think that there's something even more nefarious going on. I don't think that this is like, Kim, sell your stocks and pay us back. I think truly that there is a bigger play that's happening here. And I also think that there's a world, and Joe brought this up in one of our conversations earlier, that all these products are going to be sold through Trump RX, and so we're seeing some of these things that are going to be burdensome, and you're seeing the movements of some of our MSOs into this kind of conversation of, again, True Leaf going to pure medical to get onto the New York Stock Exchange, the selling of her stocks, these hearings that are supposed to start tomorrow, that is all anti, weed people that are on these hearings. I'm sure Joe will have plenty of more to talk about on that front. I just think that people need to be very laser-eyed into what is happening, and that there's nothing that is moving in this country right now without Trump's financial benefits coming along with it. And so I would definitely heed caution to anybody who thinks that this is just going to be a walk in the park. We're going to go to Schedule 3 and all of a sudden, like, you know, consumers are going to get access to better products and a cheaper rate and everything is going to be happy-go-lucky. I just see these things in the Trump administration that everything is a little bit glass half empty.
Nikki, we appreciate you joining us. I know you got to catch a flight. Thanks so much for all the hard work that you've put in to everything with NORML and as Commissioner of Agriculture, and creating a space where you know, small mom and pop business owners can get into cannabis through the hemp industry. It is a shame that, you know, one of the most American things is all about competition, small business, achieve the American dream, and yet we're in an era like most industries that begin as newer industries, just like we saw oil 100 years ago, you know, where there's this move towards monopoly. And unless we have people elected in government who can see it, who aren't going to be corrupted by money and power, and who can actually regulate to make sure that regular Americans can participate as business owners in this industry, you're right, we're going to drift towards this crony capitalist model, and only the people with money influence who can buy senators, who can buy presidents, are going to actually benefit and profit. And in the end of the day, it doesn't benefit us when we're still fighting for issues like truth and labeling, to making sure that we're not having things sprayed on our cannabis because there's shortcuts taken into cannabis growing and labor, because they outsource their vape pens for cheap products from China that leak heavy metals when you hit your vapes. I mean, there are so many concerns that I have around sick people having safe access. Because my own father had a chronic debilitating condition, and medical cannabis was something that alleviated pain and helped with the symptoms of dementia. And I couldn't in good conscience think to want to have to give him something that someone has created a subpar product that hurts people because they want to cut corners and make money. And it's sad that that's where we're trending. But I'm glad you're telling everyone to stay woke. Especially considering that your top adversary in the state, Ron DeSantis, says Florida is where woke comes to die. So you heard it from our NORML board member, Nikki Fried first. Stay woke when it comes to cannabis. And Nikki, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the fight. And thanks for everybody who's watching. Again, as Chris said, stay woke on cannabis. The next chapter is being written as we speak. So Thanks, everyone. And I'll see you all soon.
Thanks for your hard work.
Yeah. Joe, I want to go to you next, brother. I mean, you know, Nikki helped you with the amicus brief. You were the, you know, counsel of record for NORML in Himani via the United States. I mean, you know, you're the board chair currently of NORML, and you know, we've been doing great work together since I joined the board over the past 3 years. I look at we win one fight, and then it's like, wow, there's 10 more fights ahead of us. So like, you know, how do you feel in all of this, brother? Like, you know, every time we get a big victory, it seems like there's still so much more work to do.
I'm really super proud, right? Because, well, NORML, I guess, has joined the fray in fighting for constitutional rights, right? It ain't just about weed. Like, all of these cases have something to do with some other fundamental right of ours, right? And it's amazing to me to be able to, like, have marijuana often be the fulcrum that moves some of these other cases, whether it's protecting people from, you know, like overreaching in searches, or whether it's protecting you from the scent of marijuana alone being used to invade your car or your home, or your pocket, or whatever it may be. All these cases have some kind of an important core to them, and I love doing them. And since you know, the past few years, I'm proud of the work NORML's done. We've brought ourselves together. We've had teams of people writing amicus briefs. Our position has been accepted in the past, I think, 5 matters that I can remember, right? We had one in Michigan on scent as a basis for probable cause alone. We had Daniels in the 5th Circuit with guns and pot. We had Nikki's case in the 11th Circuit, Cooper. Now we have Himani. And I'm not a gun guy. I'm a New York City person. I don't really have guns. I've never fired a gun in my life, right? But I thought it was important that we protect the rights of people to do so, right? And I, along the way, am incredibly happy to be able to work with these. I work with Greg Morris from Florida, also from your state, David Holland from New York. We worked with Lee Berger from Oregon, Dan Vietz from Missouri, and we put together a really strong coalition. I had a great team ready if the Josh Schiller Commerce Clause matter out of the 1st Circuit was granted cert, but it wasn't. We were going to have Steve Dillon and Keith and Beverly rocking an amicus brief, because the key is also for us to be able to use our skills as lawyers and bring them to bear on the issue of the day, right? And I love the stuff we're learning. It could be like the commercial dispute, the regulatory stuff. NORML had a pretty cool, you know, round of engagement this past week with the DEA, right? Seeking to be admitted as an interested person, to have them redetermine the decision to, not give us a berth at the table. And then I had another spate over the First Amendment and whether, media companies should be able to have access via live stream as the public should in a matter of great importance, which is this rescheduling hearing. And I'm just elated at the stuff NORML's been doing. But of course, there's always like, whether you're a father, a doctor, it doesn't make a difference. There's always going to be some other thing that is right in front of you or aside you or that you should have done behind you. That's like the nature of life. But what a fucking dream. Excuse me. Can I curse a little on your show here? Like just a little bit? Or
we are not FCC regulated. That's why we're no longer on the radio. So
what a fucking dream, man. Like I have spent like almost 100,000 years studying law as a lawyer, working as a lawyer, defending people, right? And like half of that's cannabis related. And I've reached a tipping point, and I can't believe that I have created a job where I speak about and study and defend and advocate about people's rights to consume like all day long. And my fear, I've said this before, is like, what is going to happen next at this rescheduling hearing? And have we all been, maybe not all of us, but have most of us been asleep for decades and not seeing what's going to happen? It just is brain boggling to me.
Man,
Gary, I had a quick question for Joe, because this is important, right? What NORML had a seat at the original rescheduling hearing.
No, we didn't.
Right?
We weren't invited then either. We were denied interested person status, but there were 21 or 23 interested parties in the first hearing, including a number of entities that were on the other side that weren't just prohibitionist groups. Now we've got 7 prohibitionist groups, and the DEA is like our advocate. You're being advocated. Schedule 3 is being advocated for by the DEA. And Sam and all these other groups are going to be on the other side. And I'd imagine that there's going to be a discussion about the need for there to be appropriate safeguards and controls, as opposed to dispensation without a prescription by a pharmacist, as would be allowed for some substance like a botanical is not governed by the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. So it would have been nice to have a seat at the table as a counterbalance, as a voice, counterbalancing what I imagine to be the almost institutional position of the other side.
Well, it's interesting to see, how it's all going to shake out. Obviously, NORML was denied a seat at the table. You applied for, reconsideration. They're basically like, yeah, go fuck yourselves, and then that's how the DEA has, essentially operated, because even when their own administrative law judge back in the 80s said, yeah, cannabis doesn't belong in Schedule 1. And they were basically like, well, we're not fucking doing that. And then they just, it's remained the status quo ever since then. So, I mean, that's just kind of wild to see how they act, And
it was the smart approaches for marijuana and Kevin Sabet, those lovely people that we all hate so much, that basically tanked the first attempt at rescheduling because of the collusion that was involved. And I see it happening again. Do you see it that it's going on again?
I don't know. I haven't seen it going on. I just want to be heard. And the thing is this, our position is really pretty simple. Marijuana does not have to be a Schedule 3 drug to be regulated pursuant to international drug control treaties. It does not have to be stuck at Schedule 3. That's not an endpoint. And the DEA saying we're not interested because we favor removal from Schedule 1 and concede Schedule 3 is better. Like, you could concede there's a partial fix and still be suffering a concrete injury, like they stapled back part of my leg or something. I mean, you're still injured, right? I can think of countless examples of where there's an improvement and nonetheless it's still an injury. You still have standing, you're still being hurt, and you should be allowed to be heard and discuss that, right? And again, with Schedule 3, that is, under international law and under the Controlled Substances Act, a medical purpose, right? So you say, for now, and I guess the first thing I'd object to is the validity of bifurcating medical cannabis and state legal medical cannabis from the rest of marijuana. But for now, if all of that is a Schedule 3 drug, in Todd Blanche's order, it's essentially to allow there to be no pause in providing medical care to patients, right? And then the second question is whether to put the rest of marijuana into Schedule 3. Well, that's not to put it into Schedule 3 so you can buy it and use it as an adult. That's not recreational use. That's not what gets put into Schedule 3. The question is whether we should put all that shit there instead of Schedule 1 and then use it as a control mechanism to require people to get a DEA registration if they're a mom and pop or a social equity license or someone else, and to be able to dispense a controlled substance pursuant to law, which will be cost prohibitive for many of these entities, and to use it as a means to kind of control the establishment of the cannabis industry and to allow there to be a consolidation upward, right? And with Schedule 3 cannabis products that are dispensed by a pharmacist, it could be either pursuant to a prescription, like Epidiolex, even though it's Schedule 5, you still, oddly enough, need a prescription, or there's a mechanism, as I said before, for a Schedule 2 to 5 drug to be dispensed directly by a pharmacist, not anyone else, but without a prescription. And that's almost never done. But it could be done here. And if that is done here, and if it's allowed to be done here, well, CVS and Walgreens and Duane Reade and wherever else you shop, whatever big drugstore you shop at that has like a DEA certified pharmacist there, is going to be probably the biggest point of sale for these products. And mom and pop down on Duval Street or wherever it is are not going to be. And in New York, the criminal justice encounter people who struggle to get a license and spent their life savings building up a pot business are probably not going to be able to continue. And that's just the nature of what's happening to us now.
And I see that the people who are testifying right now are not the ones who have the full medical understanding of the product in the first place. I mean, Kevin Sabet from the very beginning has been talking about pushing the idea of these single molecule products coming out from the pharma industry as being the way that we have to go. And yet we know that's not the way that cannabis works. It has to have the entourage effect. They have to have the full use of the medication itself. And yet that is where they seem to want to go. And what I find out is it appears that cannabis users, we lost Joe for a second there.
No, just his camera. But yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Oh yeah, the cannabis users seem to be a discriminated class of people, even down to the point of taxation. As you may know in Michigan right now, where they added a 24% transportation tax, so that at the cannabis retailers have to deal with before they can even sell the product. That raises the price of the product, and that again, it seems to be a tax not so much on the product, but on the people who use it, making them a discriminated class. Am I off base here?
Has it always been that way with cannabis? I mean, first off, let me get it clear. There's nothing like weed. It's different than any other substance out there, right? Absolutely different than anything out there. It's not alcohol. It's not tobacco. It's none of these controlled substances. And as I said before, we bought into this patient model for the purpose of being able to hopefully expand our access to cannabis, right? And then in many jurisdictions, it provided a basis for people to use weed without being imprisoned. But along the way, what we did was we traded things. We kind of compromised. And we said, okay, we'll treat it as a Schedule 3 drug, and then I can get my 280E. I can get out from under the disentitlement, right, of 280E, and I can take all my deductions and everything else. But you know what? What about the customers? Like, what about the clients? What about the consumers that bought all the weed from you? Like, what about all those people? And, you know, for there to be a circumstance where these companies have now kind of entered a situation where they may require of you, even if it's not a prescription, you know, being in a logbook, having marijuana given to you by the pharmacist, having the transaction completely, and I guess medical patients are used to this anyway, but in New York and in any recreational market, we're really not accustomed to this. It's bad enough that someone takes your driver's license and they know how tall you are, right? Like what color like my eyes are, but like on what ground, right? But now we're going to have tens of millions of people at potentially at the cusp of having to do that. And no one seems to care. And for what? And it's marijuana. And somewhere along the way, I think we've gone terribly astray. And so to me, and I think the normal position has been, yes, Schedule 3 is an improvement over Schedule 1, maybe not for reasons some people think. You know, gosh, for me, it's only a 10-year maximum if you're going to be imprisoned on a federal Schedule 3 offense, instead of like maybe a 10-year minimum if it's pot, or a lifetime maximum, but it's still a lot of time in prison for, Schedule 3 violations. The same penalty would apply. Misdemeanor possession for marijuana federally, up to a year in prison. Same shit for a Schedule 3 drug. It's really no difference. The funny thing is, the feds are much more likely to prosecute a diverting doctor, or a pharmacist that doesn't keep appropriate records, or patients that are selling prescription drugs, than they are people who are possessing marijuana, right? You can't find really any of these federal standalone marijuana conspiracy cases through the years, but we've begged to be put into the core of the Controlled Substances Act. People have been begging, like begging to go get their 280E shit, right? So they can be standing like right into the center of this like enforcement regime, instead of out in the penumbra and like no one really knows what to do with you. We've now begged in, right? And so why shouldn't all of us then be subject to the same requirements that anyone else getting a Schedule 3 drug is subject to, right? Whether you're making it, producing it, selling it. And by the way, the DEA, when they sell you back the weed, Chris, they're going to be selling it to the processors, so they can then process these things for us and then give it to a, quote, dispensary, which of course will be one of those places where the pharmacist gives you the weed. And we're in a place where I find it hard to imagine that won't happen.
And it's not going to be like in Uruguay where it's $2 a gram. We're going to be paying for you're going to be paying a premium. You're going to be paying for taxes in certain states that do tax medicine. I mean, this doesn't feel like the type of legalization we all envisioned.
No, but two things, Chris. Like, even if it was cheap, let's say it was cheaper than Uruguay, it wouldn't make it right that it's in Schedule 3, right? The price of the cannabis has nothing to do with it. And then Uruguay and Canada and all these other countries where marijuana has been totally like legalized, all of them have a difference from the United States of America, and it's our 250th birthday. I saw the news today. Good Morning America says the best invention that the United States ever had, and I still believe it, is like democracy, right? And if you look at our Constitution, no matter how some people try to mess it up and fuck up the law and ruin the things that have built America and that we've held sacrosanct, we do have a Constitution, and it's Article 4, Section 2. It's called the Treaty Clause. And since we bought into a treaty, the Drug Control Treaty, that was ratified by Congress after being signed by the president, we're bound by it, and it's the supreme law of the land, unlike in a civil law nation like, say, Canada. Right? So because we're a country that's bound by the rule of law and our Constitution, we have this little convention problem thing, right? And that's why, when I think about the Office of Legal Counsel or the State Department, or some of the opinions on how far down the schedule you could put cannabis and still abide by your treaty obligations. Well, first off, when we signed those treaties, we agreed there's not going to be a recreational drug market for anything. There's not going to be any recreational. They're not going to be like recreationally consuming opium or a touch of fentanyl or any of that shit. There's not going to be a pot market that's recreational, nothing. And so now that we're stuck there and we don't have like a historical basis like, say, Bolivia and coca leaves, right? With weed, we just don't, no matter how long people have smoked it wherever else in the world they've smoked it. We don't really have that shit. We have to figure out how to either diplomatically remove ourselves from a treaty that requires us to penalize people a certain way and then imprison them a certain way, right? Like, and maybe if we had to penalize them a certain way, maybe we didn't have to imprison them, right? Maybe vesting some kind of domestic criminal outcome in an international body is too much, but perhaps the mere structure is okay. But there's a lot of work that we can do with, and you think about all the over-the-counter things that are non-scheduled that you get that have some form of control. They're purity tested, right? They're product tested. They're labeled. They're provided in a certain manner, and you can provide them in, a more controlled manner. And before I forget, by the way, like a lot of kids, you mentioned Alabama earlier, a lot of kids that want to use drugs like Accutane or some kind of acne prescription medication, particularly women, have to have monthly pregnancy tests. And it's Accutane. The reason is about birth defects. And when you say that in Alabama about pot, you're presuming, you're adopting some, I think, baseless trope that somehow marijuana is going to cause a birth defect, right? And so for me, it's more about the voodoo science that leads you to that conclusion than the bar on the conduct per se. But I don't think that most of the people that are behind this rule are really behind the idea of legacy to legal, right? The cannabis consumer is somehow this paradigm of like the community. You see the same things, the same bad names that the Justice Department called us, the unhinged mental patient, habitual drunkard kind of stuff that needs to somehow be controlled, right? And that's what people have cozied up to government on the theory of is here's a way to control this. Nikki says maybe here's even a way for you to get a piece of this new industry, right? You can control it through your health mechanism or whatever it's going to be. But I don't think that at the end of the day, the people that we have been advocating for as consumers vis-a-vis NORML are necessarily ensured of having easier access to cannabis or at a lower cost. And I call this like the legalization paradox, right? Like there's two parts of that. One is they don't give as much money to like advocacy groups, right? But the other part of the legalization paradox vis-a-vis the consumer or the patient is that people in legal states like me in New York who could go smoke weed on the street, right? Anywhere you can smoke tobacco. If marijuana is now a Schedule III drug with appropriate, like the same kinds of controls, then I'm being enforced against more onerously than before. And in most adult use states, you'd find that same kind of paradox. But people don't think it through that much. And consumers have a hard time believing that somehow we can take 2 steps forward and we won't be compelled to take a step back, right? But this is like the nature of our world as we know it, right? As nothing's linear. So I don't think Schedule III is going to be this, whatever the rule is here, and it'll be subject to argument, and maybe the bet people will win, and who knows. But that is not an endpoint for NORML's work. And I think the next thing we need to do is file, as we have in the past, a new petition to take marijuana out of the schedules, but to be regulated in a manner that's required to satisfy what still remains of our, international drug treaty requirements.
Well, that's well said, Joe. And I think one of the things that came up in the Hemani case, and you touched on it, Nikki touched on it, the nature of how they try to blanketly classify, cannabis consumers as dangerous. And they all went back to, well, what if we applied this same legal test to alcohol? And how, looking at our founding fathers, should we have disarmed them, right? And I found the bar tab for George Washington's farewell party.
Really?
Yes, and 55.
And they had nickel beer, by the way.
They only had 55 delegates and attendees and 16 entertainers and staff. And the bar tab was 60 bottles of claret, 54 bottles of Madeira wine, 22 bottles of porter, 12 bottles of beer, 8 bottles of whiskey, 8 bottles of hard cider, 7 large punch bowls of alcoholic punch.
Where's the weed? Where's the weed?
With those teeth problems that Washington had, I'm pretty sure he went out back with Jefferson and smoked a blunt afterwards. I don't know. But one of the things that really does concern, as you said, is the litigious nature of the fights ahead, and that folks need to be educated. And I think that there is no more greater piece of education that you all do with the NORML National Legal Committee than our Key West seminar that has been going on for over 40 years. And I just wanted to take the time for every lawyer watching this show or picking it up, that there's an opportunity for you to network with Joe and Nikki and all the great legal minds across the country in regards to cannabis, whether they fall under criminal defense or constitutional defense and civil rights, and to join NORML in Key West coming up in November 12th through the 14th. So I've dropped the links there in the chat for folks to click on and register. But I think it's important for the great work that you all do. And thank you for the work you do, because we wouldn't be where we are if it wasn't for you and the other lawyers on the National Legal
and you and the work that we all do, right? And thank you for having us here, and for continuing to educate the public, and for continuing to do the work that you're doing in Florida and moving us towards what I hope in my lifetime will be true legalization. It's been an amazing journey. It's going to continue to be an amazing journey, and it's great to have like strong, committed friends like you, Chris, along the way, and you, Gary. So thank you both.
We appreciate it. Gary, I'm going to give you the last question for Joe so we can wrap up and go to the news.
Oh, good. Give the last question to the Ukrainian Jew. That's fine. That works out for me. I mean, it probably works out for you too, Joe. But my question to you basically is this: the average cannabis consumer who wants their medication, or who wants to be able to have the right to choose whatever medication that they want at whatever price they can possibly afford, what can they do to keep this industry on the right path?
Well, if cannabis and prices will always be tough, right? There'll always be some cannabis that's like hard to obtain. What you can do to keep it on the right path is you can try to listen to and watch where you can any kinds of news coverage on the rescheduling hearing. You can study different news sources. You can write to your elected officials. You can write op-eds. You can speak out. You can join NORML. You can join advocacy groups. If you have the funding, you can support those groups. If you want to get together and do impact litigation, I think like the stuff we're doing is really impact litigation, right, Chris? When we do these amicus briefs or when we try to get a seat at that table and we want to be present. And so if you can do that, do it. And if you can bundle your efforts with other like-minded people, that can be very powerful too.
Well said, Joe. Well said. Well, you look, we got a lot of work ahead of us. If folks want to help out, it's very important that they understand why we still matter as an organization, why NORML still matters in the 21st century. Check out our latest op-ed in High Times talking about it. And then, of course, become a member. Joining NORML, for $42 a year. All those proceeds go to helping us with our member education, go to producing those great articles that you see Par Armentano, our deputy director, put out each and every week. You see in the news coming at the bottom of the screen, and that's because of those great articles and all the research that Paul has helped compile on NORML.org. So if you're ever sitting around the dinner table with that one uncle who just doesn't get it, go to NORML.org and educate yourself. You can essentially get the ammunition you need to win the argument. But there's so many great things you can do. Like Joe said, you can write a letter to a member of Congress. You can ask them to support your member of Congress, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment Expungement Act, the MORE Act, which is House Resolution 5068. And if you go to NORML.org and you go to our Take Action Center, you can find out what's happening in your state locally and among your chapters. And then, of course, if you find yourself like we were, over a decade ago, man, looking around, it's like, hey, I don't like what's going on in this state. I don't like that people are going to jail in Florida for less than an ounce. You can start your own NORML chapter. Just go to NORML.org and find out how you can get 10 friends together and start a NORML chapter and do what we've done here at Suncoast NORML and really build something that becomes a place for advocacy that puts consumers first. And if you can do just the bare minimum, hit that like, share, subscribe button. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram right now. You're watching Twitter and Twitch and across different social media platforms. Go to Spotify. You can listen to the audio only episodes of the rotation. But I think it's important that folks remain involved, that they remain active, and that they do what they can to support all the great work that as I said, our legal committee has done, that our grassroots chapters are doing, and that we continue to do here. And with all of that, team, I'm going to jump real quickly into the NORML news. So just looking at the top of the news and some of the important news stories that we were having, I think it's important as we set the stage. Nearly 10% of U.S. adults say they use cannabis to promote sleep. And this is survey data that was published recently in the Journal of Sleep Health with researchers affiliated with Virginia Commonwealth University and the National Sleep Foundation. Surveyed that a nationally representative sample of U.S. adults found 1 in 5 respondents acknowledge having consumed cannabis products to aid their sleep, with 9% of respondents saying they currently use marijuana to promote sleep. And among the respondents with no current or past cannabis use, 11% expressed interest in using it to help in the future aid their sleep. And I think it's important for folks to realize, whether you're someone that has chronic debilitating health conditions, something like diabetes, something that causes you where you can't get a decent night's sleep because you're up all night having to take a piss all the time, cannabis is something that actually helps with that. And so it's no shocker there. And so moving on to the next news story that I think is important is that where we're headed as a country is we have more and more medical marijuana states, and that we have more and more medical marijuana programs coming online. And it's that the workplace issues that we have, health-related workplace absences actually decline following medical marijuana and cannabis legalization. And this is based off of data published in the Journal of Workplace Behavioral Health. For those who don't know, I actually work for a labor union in America, one of the largest labor unions across the world. And I think that it's important that the issue of labor in cannabis be uplifted. This is why Gary and I have been fighting for workplace protections in Florida for over half a decade. Researchers from the United States and India assess whether medical cannabis laws or adult use legalization laws are associated with with changes in health-related workplace absenteeism. And consistent with prior research, investigators reported that workers are less likely to be absent from work due to illness following medical cannabis legalization. By contrast, adult use legalization was not associated with any significant changes in absenteeism. Shocker that if you just let people smoke weed, it helps with their health issues, and they're more likely to not call out sick at work. So, I mean, for politicians who just have this prohibitionist mindset, they need to realize that it just doesn't work. And again, we get a lot of flack on this show because people like to try to say it has a leftward slant and we're only supporting one party. But again, we give credit where credit is due. And I think that some credit is due from the state of Vermont right now. Republican governor of Vermont, Phil Scott, signed legislation in the law, Senate Bill 278, which increases the amount of cannabis that retailers may sell to customers in a single transaction and doubles how much marijuana an adult may legally possess. So kudos to Republican Governor Phil Scott for stepping up. Under the new law, which took effect upon passage, those 21 and older can purchase up to 2 ounces of botanical cannabis from a state licensed retailer, and they may also publicly possess up to 2 ounces of marijuana and or up to 10 grams of hash. Those thresholds are double the state's previous limits, and the state already permits adults to possess greater amounts in private if cannabis comes from their own personal harvest. So again, if you're just in the comfort of your own home, growing your own bud, you shouldn't have these arbitrary caps on plants and plant counts that we've seen in so many states, whether they be red states or blue states. Prohibition as a policy just doesn't work. And, it is a contentious issue, even in blue states like Virginia. The lawmakers and the governor were at an impasse, and they finally have come together where lawmakers have approved a budget for 2027 that has language regulating adult use cannabis sales. What was it, 2021 when Virginia actually got the opportunity to legalize adult use, and here we are. They're not even going to have adult sales until 2027. It has been a battle. And I want to say a big thank you to our friends at Virginia NORML, our NORML development director, J.M. Padini, who is the executive director of the Virginia chapter. They have been doing amazing work ensuring that Virginia voters get the retail regulated cannabis market that they've been fighting for, that they've been voting for and advocating for after so many years. So
yeah, go JM.
Yes. And of course, why does this all matter? And that is because of money. State legal cannabis sales held firm in 2025 and exceeded $29 billion, according to the data compiled by Bank Staffing and Whitney Economics. That's right. State licensed cannabis products total $29.1 billion, which is slightly down from $30.1 billion in 2024. Obviously, we know the economy's been in a recession, but hey, people are still buying billions and billions of dollars a week. And despite the minor decline in annual revenue, the report's authors estimated that revenues quickly rebounded and will exceed $43 billion by 2030. So we definitely are in a place where we can make it happen. We just have to make sure that we shape what type of legalization we support. So.
And that would actually pay for 2 days of the war. So that would actually, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, then that's the normal news. I mean, look, we got so much that we can accomplish and get done. How legalization is shaped up and what it looks like is dependent on you watching at home and for those of us out here in the fight. So we got to step up and make it happen. And with all that, team, we're going to catch you next week in the rotation. I got to run. Gary, it was great seeing you, brother. Everybody keep Carlos in your thoughts and prayers. His cat, Mary Jane, is sick. That's why he couldn't join us today. And Mary Jane has been an awesome part of the NORML family. So we pray for a speedy recovery for her. And of course, catch us next week. Hit that like and subscribe button. Become a member of Suncoast NORML. Subscribe to our YouTube. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and jump into rotation each and every
And by the way, I don't care what party you belong to. If you are interested in coming on this show, we want to hear what you have to say. We were only about a month or so away from the primaries here in Florida, and we got a lot of candidates who have not responded to us when we have contacted them asking if they want to come on the show. And we're not trying to pull just the Democrats out there, because I always tell folks, don't vote the party, vote the person, because that really is so important, because ideology is not, the concept of just one party. You need to go ahead and just take a look and see who we're talking to. So we want to know what you have to say. So if you're interested in coming on, contact us, and we're very easy to get to, and we will get you on the show. We got a lot of candidates already coming on, but we got a lot of slots left. So we want to hear from you.
Indeed.
That includes you, Matt the Welder. I'm not kidding you. I'm going to come to your house. I'm going to start stalking all your events. And I'm bringing fish.
All right, Gary. Well, let's catch you next week, brother. You have a good one.
All right.